Good morning, my dear students, and welcome back to our fun reads. Now, as you know, we finished our Wild Rescuers Guardians of the Taiga last time. And this time, we are looking for a new book to read. Well, I told you that I do have the sequel to Wild Rescuers. However, after talking with some of the other teachers, since this was a more science-y book, we're going to actually read a social studies book next. We will read this. Do not worry. We are going to read this. But we're going to read a book series that's near and dear to my heart when I was little. And it's based on social studies. It's about real places. We're going to read a book called Carol Marsh's Mysteries. Now, you can see on the front cover, it says The Mystery of Big Ben, London, England. So this is a book. It has fictional characters. However, London is a real place. And what this book is going to do is it's going to give us some history about London. It's going to show us what life is kind of like in London, while also solving some kind of mystery. With that being said, this is a very quick book. We should get it done in maybe a couple of days. So first we did science, now we're doing social studies, and then we'll go back to science, okay? So, and remember that I did not write these books. Carol Marsh is the author of this book, and she wrote this, okay? The Mystery of Big Ben. Chapter 1. Getting there is half the fun. Bong, bong, cried Grant. Bong, 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 bong. Grant, if you bong one more time, I'm gonna bong you on the head, his grandmother Mimi said. They were standing in the middle of a busy Heathrow airport, watching for Papa and Grant's sister Christina to appear with the luggage. They had just flown from Paris aboard Papa's little red and white airplane, the Mystery Girl. The Mystery Girl is the name of the airplane. Suddenly, an overflowing luggage cart appeared. It staggered left and right towards them as if it were propelled by a seasick ghost. Also, there is a picture I'm going to show you. It's a little map. Shows you where London is located. Shows you England. Shows you the areas around England. Grant jumped just before the cart ran over his foot. "Hey, careful there," he screeched. A head thrust out from each side of the cart. "Can't believe we have so much luggage," Papa said. He looked handsome in his cowboy hat and boots, and leather vest he always wore. But he was panting like a dog. Christina plopped down on the floor. "This luggage cart is crazy. I thought we would never get this stuff pushed all the way over here. I'm exhausted." "Bong, bong, bong," cried Grant yet again. Christina and Papa stared at him like he was crazy. "And just what is that all about?" Papa asked, holding his head with both his hands. Mimi sighed. "Grant thinks he will just die if we don't go see Big Ben right away," she explained. "I do not know why he is so excited about a clock." Grant thrusts his hands on his hips in his "don't make fun of me just 'cause I'm only 7" pose. "It isn't just any old clocks," he said. "Big Ben is the most famous clock in the world. It's tall, it's loud, and I want to see it. I doubt that it's louder than you, Christina teased her brother. She brushed her bangs away from her forehead. I doubt anything is as loud as Grant, Papa agreed. He's loud, but he's cute and sweet, Mimi teased, tousling Grant's blonde crew cut, meaning she kind of messed around with his hair. But I'm still going to bong him on the head if he imitates Big Ben anymore, till we go and see it for ourselves. Bong, bong, whispered Grant. What was that? Christina asked. Little Ben! Grant cried and laughed. Papa ended the discussion by saying, Here, partner, and dumping a large duffel bag into Grant's arms. Oof, said Grant, swaying under the weight. He wandered left and right. All you could see was the bags and his little arms holding it on for dear life, and his legs quivering beneath him. Christina laughed until Papa said, You too, Missy, and tossed her a suitcase that seemed to weigh a ton. These are too heavy, Christina complained. Then next time don't pack so much, said Papa. Those are your bags, you know. Papa threw a handbag over his shoulder and picked up a small case. And these are mine, he said with a smile. Grant had dropped his duffel on the floor, and Christina did the same. Then whose are all those? They asked, pointing to a large mound of red suitcases of all sizes. Papa looked at Mimi. Christina looked at Mimi. Grant looked at Mimi. Mimi looked at the ceiling, ignoring them all. Mimi, Christina squealed. What is all that stuff? Mimi looked at them and smiled secretively. Oh, you know, this and that. I do have to meet the Queen, you know. And I have to write them a mystery, you know. So, you know, I need a lot of stuff. Papa just shook his head tiredly. Christina and Grant laughed. Mimi wrote mystery books for kids and set in them in real locations, like the one she would be working on here in London, England. Papa was a travel agent and trail boss, and when Christina and Grant were out of school, they got to tag along, and were supposed to stay out of the way, but they never did. Why? Because they felt it was their official job to help Mimi discover mystery facts, places, and people to put in her books. But sometimes things backfired, like now. For suddenly, there was a loud boom, which echoed throughout the busy terminal. What was that? Said Mimi. Was it a bomb? Christina asked. She knew there had been some terrorist bombs in London in the past. No, said Grant. It's that. They all turned around and stared at the overloaded luggage cart, which had tipped and fallen over, tossing Mimi's red luggage to the floor. Ugh, said Papa with a sigh and began to hoist all the suitcases back into place. Chapter 2, Putting on the Ritz. Soon, Mimi, Papa, Grant, and Christina, and all that luggage were speeding from the airport into downtown London and into a shiny black taxicab. Excuse me, said Grant, as soon as they got underway. Excuse me, he repeated more urgently. Finally, the taxi driver realized that Grant was talking to him. Yes, son? He said in the English accent that Christina just loved. Grant looked very nervous. In case you didn't notice, I think you're driving in the wrong side of the road. The driver just laughed. Not at all, he promised. We are driving on the left side of the road in England, he explained. The left side is the right side to us. Grant frowned. The left side is the right side? I think the left side is the wrong side. Papa put his arm around his grandson's shoulders. It's okay, Grant. They really do drive on this side of the road here. You knew that, didn't you, Christina? Christina let out a huge, big sigh of relief. Sure, she answered. She was 3 years older than her brother, and liked to think she knew 3 years more worth of stuff than he did. But this was a new one. Oh well, she guessed she'd get used to driving on the wrong side of the road. She wondered why Mimi was a scaredy cat driver and rider and was not saying anything. But when she looked at her grandmother, she understood. Mimi's eyes were closed. Where are we headed, sir? The driver asked Papa. Papa beamed. He loved to surprise Mimi. Why, to the Ritz, of course. Mimi's eyes flew open and gave Papa a big kiss on the cheek. Oh, what fun, she said. If I can't stay in the Buckingham Palace with the Queen, we might as well stay at the Ritz, right? Grant and Christina clung tightly to their jump seats as the taxi rattled down the busy road. Right, said Christina. Left, said Grant. We're here, said Papa, and the taxicab swerved neatly into place in front of the large, magnificent hotel, the Ritz. Not like the Cracker, it's a hotel. A man in a swanky uniform with gold-braided trim opened the taxi's door, doffed his top hat, and escorted Christina onto the red carpet with a scoop of his arm. Welcome to the Ritz, young lady, he said. Thank you, Christina said with a surprise. Soon they were all pardoning into a beautiful old hotel, which seemed to be all velvet and gold and palm trees and light. Wow, Papa, Christina said. I think you've outdone yourself this time. Papa leaned down and whispered, Maybe I can keep Mimi out of trouble if she can hole up here and write for a while. He gave his granddaughter a big wink. Christina thought. And maybe if Mimi is writing and Papa is sitting doing in some big armchairs drinking coffee and reading his newspaper like he always does, she and Grant could get out and explore all by themselves, like they love to do. Mimi led the way down the red carpet like she was a queen. She loved glamour and parties and ritzy places like the Ritz. Their burden of luggage magically vanished, and so they prodded right up to the thickly carpeted steps into the beautiful palm court of a traditional English afternoon tea. I'm not too crazy about tea, you know, Grant complained. Then how about a milkshake, young man? A waiter said as he seated Grant in a large, overstuffed armchair. How about some of those, too? Said Grant, staring hungrily at the mountain of dainty tea sandwiches and mounds of cookies and pastries. Our wish is your command, said the waiter smartly, as everyone was seated at a beautiful set table. I like this puttin' on the Ritz, Grant said, and everyone laughed. Suddenly a tall, well-dressed, Mimi would say the word dapper, man strode directly to their table. Without a word, he lifted Mimi's hand and kissed the top of it. Welcome to London, he said cheerily. Mimi blushed and introduced him all around. She told them Mr. Bryan here was the publisher of her books for all of Great Britain, which included England, Ireland, Scotland, and all parts of the British Empire, as he called it. As the men sat down in one of the empty chairs, Grant asked him, What language do you speak? The man laughed. Well, English, of course. It sounds very different, said Christina. They probably speak left English and we speak right English, guessed Grant. We speak the Queen's English, the man said. The language of the bard. The bard, repeated Grant, confused. Christina raised her hand as if she were in school. Oh, you know Grant, Shakespeare, the playwright. Grant was still confused. Did he write the Harry Potter books? Everyone laughed, and Grant looked like his feelings were hurt. Mimi, who took kids and reading and writing very seriously, set things straight. William Shakespeare. He is the greatest playwright of all time. He wrote Romeo and Juliet, Twelfth Night, Macbeth, and many other comedies and tragedies. Suddenly Grant's eyes lit up. Oh yeah, Bill S. I remember him. We studied him in the Montessori. He looked like he felt much better. What Grant really remembered, Christina knew, was that Mimi had written a kid's book about Shakespeare and read it to Grant when he was little. Grant had a very good memory, especially when it came to numbers, which is why, she figured, he was so interested in Big Ben. To be or not to be, that is the question, Grant blurted, then added, to be hungry or eat something of this good tea stuff, please. Everyone laughed and began to fill their plates when two children suddenly ran up into the palm court. Mr. Bryan stood to greet them. May I introduce you to my own two grandchildren, Maggie and George, he said proudly. The boy gave a bow and the girl curtsied. Christina and Grant giggled. Can you teach me to do that? Christina asked the red-haired, freckled-cheeked girl who looked just like her age. Oh, you'll have to curtsy if you're going to visit the Queen, Maggie said. I'll be glad to teach you. She plopped down into the chair next to Christina. Christina knew they would be instant friends. Grant and George, who also seemed to be similar ages, stared at one another suspiciously. You're not going to teach me to bow, are you? Grant asked. George, whose hair was pitch black, who had pitch black hair slicked back almost like a little vampire, gave a mischievous grin. Absolutely not, he said. I'm going to teach you all about torture and rats and all other good stuff. Grant grinned right back, and the two boys shook hands, not even noticing that they were smushing one of the pastries on Grant's plate. Christina could see that they would be instant best friends too, and as soon as they had eaten, they were eager to let the mystery adventure begin. Let's see, how much is chapter 3? I'm going to continue one more chapter. Chapter 3, Big Red Bus. It didn't take long for the adventure to begin, nor the mystery. Christina was delighted when Mr. Bryan had said that he had a nephew who drove for one of the famous big red double-decker sightseeing buses. So, like, think of a school bus on top of a school bus, like two school buses that you can sit in the top row or the bottom row. And now imagine that yellow school bus with red. That's what they're talking about. He had arranged an afternoon tour for the kids to all ride around London, while Mimi and Papa settled at the Ritz. Christina knew Mimi was on a tight deadline to finish the first draft of her new manuscript, and figured her publisher thought if he could get the kids out of her hair, she could settle down and write. Papa, who was very protective, was a little skeptical. Is your nephew responsible? Will he keep a good eye on the kids? They do have a tendency to strike out on their own whenever they get the chance, he admitted, giving Grant and Christina a "you better behave" look. Oh yes, said Mr. Bryan. This afternoon run is his last of the day, and he can drop them off right back here at the Ritz in an hour or so. Just then the red bus pulled up in front. It was hard to miss. Please, Christina begged. Please, begged Grant. Mimi and Papa looked at each other and then nodded, and the four kids took off like a streak out of the palm court, back down the red carpet, out of the revolving door, and onto the top of the level of the bus. Mr. Bryan had a few words with his nephew, Gilbert. Gilbert shook his head up and down, and the two men shook hands. and Mr. Bryan joined Mimi and Papa on the red carpet. The kids waved goodbye as the big red bus rolled away. What Mr. Bryan could not have known is that his nephew Gilbert was going to get off early to go to a rock concert with his girlfriend Britta, or at least that's what he said. At the very next stop, a new driver came to replace him. Gilbert hopped off the bus, ripped off his cap from his head to reveal a lime green mohawk cut. Britta wore a skirt and a top and gave him a big hug. "You guys behave, okay?" Gilbert hollered at the kids. Christina knew Mimi and Papa would not be happy about this, but she did not know what to do. Besides, the new driver immediately pulled off into the busy traffic and they were off. Soon, Christina was excited and relaxed. It was a beautiful afternoon. The sky was blue as a green leaf tree swaying in the breeze, and a golden afternoon light keeping them warm in the perch on the top of the bus. As they drove around the city of London, the driver kept up running the commentary about the tourist sites. He called off all famous names that Christina had heard about, read about, and studied about in school. It made her want to stop and visit each place. "We can do that," said Maggie. Then Christina expressed her desire aloud. "This is the kind of bus you can get off at the stops and then reboard later." "Yeah," said George. "That's the whole idea." Christina frowned. I don't think that was Mimi and Papa's idea. She felt sure that her grandparents thought that they would just ride the route and return to the hotel. But all of a sudden, the driver called out, "Big Ben!" And Grant, who had been listening to the discussion, jumped up and bounced down the steps, hopping off the bus onto the sidewalk. There was nothing else the other kids could do but follow him. As they stood in front of the tall clock tower, Christina and Grant were surprised to hear Maggie say, "That's not Big Ben." "Sure it is," said Grant, his ready to pick a fight look on his face. "It's tall. It's a clock. It's London. It's Big Ben." "No, it isn't," Maggie insisted as the kids all stared at the four-side clock tower that rose over the House of Parliament. "Parliament! It's the big bell that chimes. That is really Big Ben. This is a clock tower." "Oh," said Christina, truly surprised. "Oh," Grant said, truly disappointed. Then he asked, "But I can still call the whole kit and knob Big Ben." Maggie and George laughed. "Sure," she said, "everybody does." "People love Big Ben," Maggie said. "I guess you could say it's one of our most beloved national treasures. This big old clock has been keeping time since 1859. They even rang the chimes each day before our BBC radio station." Suddenly, Christina had the strangest feeling. She couldn't help herself. She thought of the World Trade Towers in New York City. Mimi and Papa had taken her and Grant on a ride of the elevator in the big building to see the beautiful city of Manhattan at night from the very top. In 2001, when terrorists had flown airplanes into the building and caused them to collapse, she just couldn't believe it. So what she's referring to is 9/11. We talked about that earlier this year, September 11th. And in New York City, there's those two big towers, and people flew airplanes into them. So she's reminiscing on that part of history when she's seeing Big Ben. She looked up at Big Ben and could see why Grant was so enthralled. The clock tower was glowing like molten copper in the late afternoon sunlight. She sure hoped nothing ever happened to this special historic clock. All of a sudden, all the kids jumped. Bong, 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 bong. The clock chimed 5 o'clock, and all the kids could do was hold their sides and laugh. Then Grant stopped laughing. He walked right up to the clock tower and ran his hand over the brick. He looked and looked. "What is it, Grant?" Christina asked. He was acting very strange and serious. She could not imagine what the problem was. Grant did not say a thing. He continued to stare at the brick. The other kids peered over his shoulder. They could see a faint sketch done in pencil over several of the bricks. It just looked like a doodle to them, but Grant continued to run his hand over the lines and muttered to himself. "Grant, what is it?" Christina asked again. "You're giving me the creeps." Grant turned around and looked at the other kids. "Someone's gonna blow up Big Ben," he said, and pointed to the sketch on the wall. "This proves it." So that is the end of chapter 3, and our next parts will probably be chapter 4, 5, and 6. I know this book's a little older, but I hope you enjoy it. It does have some really good social studies related information, especially about London, and some of the stuff we've gone over this year in school. So I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.